The auction room went silent when the final bid appeared on the screen. $10 million. Sold. The wooden hammer struck the podium. Applause filled the luxurious ballroom as the painting was carefully removed from its display wall. At the center of the room sat Nathaniel Cross, a 52-year-old billionaire known for his private art collection and ruthless business empire. He had just purchased the painting for $10 million. But Nathaniel wasn't smiling. He was staring at the canvas. Something about it bothered him. The painting was called The Last Evening. It showed an old Victorian house surrounded by snow, with a woman standing beside a window and a little boy sitting near a fireplace. Beautiful, almost painfully realistic. But Nathaniel had noticed something nobody else seemed to see. Behind the woman, partially covered by the dark curtains, was a face. A man's face. Only one eye and half of a mouth were visible. Nathaniel leaned closer. "Who painted this?" he asked. The auction curator, Evelyn Hart, approached nervously. "The artist was Elias Vane, sir. He died nearly 30 years ago." "Did he have children?" Evelyn hesitated. "No one knows." Nathaniel looked back at the painting. "Find out." 2 hours later, the painting arrived at Nathaniel's Manhattan penthouse. His assistant, Marcus Reed, watched as 2 security workers carefully placed it against the marble wall. $10 million. Marcus said with a nervous laugh. "You could have bought an entire building." Nathaniel didn't answer. He walked toward the painting. There was something strangely familiar about that hidden face. He switched off the room's bright lights. Only a small lamp remained on. The shadows changed. And suddenly, the face became clearer. Nathaniel froze. The man's eyes weren't painted black. They were blue. A very particular shade of blue. Nathaniel stepped backward. "No." Marcus looked confused. "What is it?" Nathaniel didn't respond. He walked into his study and returned with an old photograph. It showed Nathaniel as a young boy, standing beside his mother outside a small farmhouse. Beside them was a man, Nathaniel's father, Daniel Cross. Daniel had disappeared when Nathaniel was 8 years old. For 44 years, Nathaniel had believed his father had abandoned the family. But the eyes in the painting were unmistakable. They were Daniel's eyes. Nathaniel's hands began to tremble. "Marcus," he whispered, "lock every door." "Why?" "Because my father is in this painting." Marcus stared at him. "That's impossible." Nathaniel pointed toward the canvas. Then explained the face. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. At 2:17 a.m., he returned to the painting. He noticed something he hadn't seen before. Near the bottom corner was a tiny signature. Evie. But underneath it were 4 numbers. 1978. Nathaniel's breathing stopped. That was the year his father disappeared. He grabbed his phone and called Evelyn. She answered half asleep. "Mr. Cross, where did this painting come from?" "I told you. It belonged to a private collector." "Before that?" Silence. "Evelyn." She finally spoke. "The painting was discovered 6 months ago in an abandoned farmhouse in Vermont." Nathaniel's heart pounded. "What farmhouse?" "I don't know the exact address." "Find it." "Mr. Cross, it's almost 3 in the morning." Nathaniel's voice became cold. "I'll pay whatever it takes." By sunrise, Evelyn had found the address. Nathaniel immediately flew to Vermont. When he arrived, the farmhouse looked exactly like the house in the painting. Same broken chimney. Same windows. Same old wooden porch. Nathaniel slowly stepped out of the car. Marcus followed. "Sir." Nathaniel didn't answer. He was staring at the upstairs window. The same window from the painting. Then he noticed something written on the front door. 4 words. "He never left, Nathaniel." Nathaniel's face went pale. Marcus stepped closer. "Who wrote that?" Before Nathaniel could answer, they heard a sound from inside the house. A floorboard creaked. Then another. Someone was walking upstairs. Nathaniel slowly reached for the door, and from behind it came a woman's trembling voice. "Please." Nathaniel stopped. The woman whispered, "If you're Nathaniel Cross." A pause. "You need to know what really happened to your father." Then the door opened, and standing there was an elderly woman holding an old photograph. Nathaniel looked at the photograph. His blood ran cold, because standing beside his father was a little girl, and that little girl was his mother. Nathaniel stared at the photograph. For several seconds, he couldn't breathe. The elderly woman stood silently in the doorway, her hands trembling around the faded picture. "Who are you?" Nathaniel finally asked. "My name is Clara Vane." Nathaniel looked at the farmhouse behind her. "Vane, as in Elias Vane?" She nodded. "He was my father." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "Then you painted that picture?" No. Clara looked toward the upstairs window. My father painted it. But he wasn't painting a house. Nathaniel stepped inside. What was he painting? Clara closed the door. Evidence. The word echoed through the empty farmhouse. Marcus immediately became alert. Evidence of what? Clara looked directly at Nathaniel. Your father's disappearance. Nathaniel felt his stomach tighten. My father disappeared in 1978. Everyone said he left us. That's the lie, Clara whispered. She walked toward an old wooden table and placed the photograph on it. Daniel Cross didn't abandon your family. Then what happened? Clara took a deep breath. He discovered something about the company your grandfather owned. Nathaniel froze. His grandfather had founded Cross Industries, the company Nathaniel later turned into a global empire. What did he discover? That money was being stolen. Nathaniel stared at her. How much? Millions. By whom? Clara hesitated. Then she said a name Nathaniel never expected. Your grandfather's business partner. Nathaniel's expression changed. Richard Vale? Clara nodded. Richard Vale had been considered a close family friend for decades. He had even attended Nathaniel's father's funeral. But Clara continued. Daniel found proof that Richard was secretly transferring company money into offshore accounts. Nathaniel shook his head. My father disappeared before he could expose him. He disappeared because he did expose him. Clara opened an old wooden cabinet. Inside were dozens of documents. Bank statements, letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings. Nathaniel picked one up. The headline read, Local businessman missing after car found abandoned. Nathaniel's hands shook. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because you were 8 years old. Clara looked at him sadly. And because your mother was threatened. Nathaniel looked up. My mother knew? She knew enough to be afraid. Suddenly, Marcus noticed something on the back of the painting's photograph. Mr. Cross. Nathaniel turned. Marcus pointed at a handwritten note. There were only 6 words. The face knows where he is. Nathaniel stared at it. Where who is? Clara's eyes filled with tears. Your father. Nathaniel's heart stopped. You're saying he's alive? Clara didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward a locked room at the end of the hallway. She pulled a key from around her neck. Nathaniel followed. The door opened with a long creak. Inside was a small room covered with photographs. Hundreds of them. His father. His mother. Nathaniel as a child. And Richard Vale. In the center of the room was a large photograph of Daniel. Written underneath it were the words, waiting for Nathaniel. Nathaniel stepped closer. Then he noticed something. Daniel was holding a newspaper. The date was clearly visible. October 14th, 1978. But there was something else. A tiny address had been circled in red ink. Nathaniel recognized it immediately. It was an old warehouse in Brooklyn. A warehouse that Cross Industries had recently purchased. Nathaniel looked at Marcus. Get the car. 3 hours later, Nathaniel stood outside the abandoned warehouse. Police were not involved. He didn't know who he could trust anymore. He and Marcus entered through a broken side door. Inside, the warehouse was dark and silent. They searched room after room. Nothing. Then Nathaniel heard a faint sound. A cough. He stopped. Did you hear that? Marcus nodded. They followed the sound to a small metal door. Nathaniel opened it. Inside was a tiny room. And sitting on an old chair was a man with silver hair. His face was thin. His clothes were worn. But his eyes. Nathaniel knew those eyes. The same blue eyes from the painting. The man slowly lifted his head. Nathaniel couldn't move. The man stared at him for several seconds. Then he whispered one word. Nathaniel. Nathaniel's knees nearly gave out. Dad. The man began to cry. For 48 years, Nathaniel had imagined this moment. He had imagined anger, questions, revenge. But when he finally saw his father alive, all he could do was walk forward. Daniel opened his arms. Nathaniel fell into them. Neither man spoke. They simply held each other. After a lifetime of believing he had been abandoned, Nathaniel finally understood. His father had never left him. He had been hiding to keep him alive. But then Daniel pulled away. His expression suddenly became serious. You shouldn't have bought that painting. Nathaniel looked confused. Why? Daniel pointed toward the hallway. Because whoever wanted that painting found you. Nathaniel's face changed. What are you talking about? Daniel whispered. The face wasn't meant to reveal me. He looked directly into his son's eyes. It was meant to reveal him. Suddenly, the warehouse lights switched on. Footsteps echoed through the building. Then a familiar voice came from the darkness. You always were too curious, Nathaniel. Nathaniel slowly turned around. Standing at the entrance was Richard Vale, the man who had been his family's trusted friend for nearly 50 years. Richard smiled, and behind him stood 6 men. Nathaniel stepped in front of his father. Richard looked at the old painting hanging on the warehouse wall. "You should have left the past buried." Nathaniel's voice was cold. "You tried to kill my father." Richard smiled. "No, Nathaniel." He took one step forward. "I tried to protect the secret." Then he looked at Daniel. "And now, it's time for all of you to learn why your father disappeared." Because Daniel Cross wasn't the only person who had been hiding a secret. Richard Vale stood beneath the warehouse lights, his expression strangely calm. Nathaniel kept himself between Richard and his father. "Tell me the truth," Nathaniel said. "What happened in 1978? Richard smiled faintly. "You really want to know?" "Yes." Richard looked at Daniel. "Then let him tell you." Daniel lowered his head. "I was the one who painted the hidden face." Nathaniel stared at him. "What?" Daniel slowly walked toward the painting. "The face wasn't mine." He pointed toward the shadow behind the curtain. "It was Richard's." Nathaniel turned toward Richard. For the first time, Richard's confidence disappeared. Daniel continued. "Your grandfather discovered Richard had been stealing from the company. But Richard wasn't working alone." Nathaniel's voice became quiet. "Who was helping him?" Daniel looked at him. "Your mother." Nathaniel froze. "No." Richard stepped forward. "Your mother wasn't evil, Nathaniel. She was desperate." Daniel explained that Nathaniel's mother had discovered Richard's scheme and confronted him. Richard threatened to destroy the family unless she helped him hide the evidence. But she secretly contacted Daniel. Together, they planned to expose Richard. Then Richard discovered their plan. "He came after us," Daniel said. "I escaped." "Your mother wasn't so lucky." Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears. "What happened to her?" Richard finally spoke. "She survived." Nathaniel turned sharply. "What?" Richard looked toward the floor. "She survived the accident. But she lost her memory." Nathaniel's breathing stopped. "She spent years in a private care facility under another name." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because I paid everyone to stay silent." Nathaniel looked at Richard with disbelief. "You destroyed my entire childhood." Richard's face hardened. "I was trying to protect myself." Daniel stepped forward. "You weren't protecting yourself, Richard. You were protecting the money." Richard laughed bitterly. "Money." He looked at Nathaniel. "Your grandfather didn't build Cross Industries alone. I built half of it. But when he died, everything went to your family." Nathaniel stared at him. "So you stole it?" "I took what I believed was mine." "No," Nathaniel replied. "You destroyed lives." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus stepped forward and placed a phone on the table. Richard's face changed. "What is that?" "Everything," Marcus said. He had secretly recorded the entire conversation. Police sirens suddenly echoed outside. Richard looked toward the warehouse doors. "You called the police?" Nathaniel shook his head. "No." Daniel smiled sadly. "I did." Richard's face went pale. Within minutes, officers entered the warehouse. Richard was arrested. But Nathaniel wasn't thinking about Richard anymore. He was thinking about his mother. 3 weeks later, Nathaniel stood outside a quiet care facility in Vermont. The woman sitting near the window looked older than he remembered. But when Nathaniel entered the room, she looked up. For several seconds, she stared at him. Then her eyes widened. "Nathaniel." He stopped breathing. "Mom." She smiled through tears. "You finally came home." Nathaniel walked toward her and held her tightly. For the first time in decades, the Cross family was together again. Daniel stood in the doorway, crying quietly. The mystery of the painting had finally been solved. But Nathaniel still kept it. He didn't sell it. He didn't hide it. Instead, he placed it in the entrance of his company. Underneath it, he added a small plaque. "Some truths may remain hidden for decades, but the truth always finds a way to be seen." Years later, people would ask Nathaniel why he had paid $10 million for an old painting. He would always give the same answer. "I thought I was buying a painting." He would look at his father, standing beside him. "But I was really buying back my family." And every time Nathaniel looked at the hidden face behind the curtain, he remembered the lesson that had changed his life forever. Money can buy almost anything, but it can never buy back the years you've lost.